Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible come together to fulfill the story of God.
Hello, I'm Jay.
I'm Abby.
And I'm Fletcher.
And today's story is about the daughters of Zelophehad. We are in the book of Numbers today, so get out your calculators before we dive into this one.
That's so bad. That's so bad.
I'm
So
proud to have
dad.
written that joke.
I was just going to say, I'm only reading what's written, although I probably
terrible
would have come up with that on my own as a dad.
Yeah.
And then a father to be there. Not Fletcher's not pregnant. Riley's not pregnant. Just for the record.
No.
Right.
But one day.
Okay, so we do questions at the start of each, and today we're in the book of Numbers, and so I have a Numbers related, but it's not really it's a series of questions, and what it's going to be an exercise here. I need you guys as quickly as you can. When I ask a question, you answer it.
Okay.
Don't stop and think.
Does this involve math?
It involves math. Very quick
Quick math.
simple math.
Oh boy.
And the goal is you just answer as quickly as you
All
can.
right.
All the questions that I ask as quick as you
Okay.
can. No
Are
stopping,
we going to go one
no
at
pausing.
a time, or are we doing it at the same time?
You guys can answer even in unison.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
you'll come up with those.
I'm not great at the quick math.
Okay.
I'm not good at math.
All right. 5 plus 5.
10.
8 plus 2.
10.
9 plus 1.
10.
7 plus 3.
10.
15 minus 5.
10.
2 plus 8.
10.
17 minus 7.
10.
5 plus 5.
10.
Name a vegetable.
Carrot.
Onions.
Can you read what I wrote here on this sign?
Jay
Or this-
wrote carrot on
because
his
I knew that Abby
Would
was going
say
to say carrot.
carrot.
And I bet you as you're listening along,
I'm so
you said
confused.
carrot as well.
That's cool.
Fletcher
I think
did it,
Abby
though.
thinks of carrots a lot anyway.
What did you say?
I said onion.
Onion.
I like onion.
Okay.
I don't think of carrots in my daily life.
One
They're-
time I was at No Frills, and this is one of my proudest shopping moments. And there was a 5-pound bag of carrots, and it was $4. And then there was a 10-pound bag of carrots, and it was $2. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get the 10-pound bag. But Josh and I were going away that weekend, and we
Yeah.
had so many carrots, so I just started giving them away. I actually brought them to
I
one of
refused
our
the
podcast
carrots.
recordings.
That's right. You brought them to a recording session.
I
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
I
yeah.
gave them away. I was giving
And
them all away.
I enjoyed carrots.
I'll be
for
honest,
a couple
I did
days
think
after
of
that.
carrots first and then filtered myself and said onion just to
Really?
switch it
Okay.
up. So carrots did come to mind first.
Okay,
Oh,
so
Weird.
they say there's some psychology wrapped up in that, and it's tied to 10 karat, as in 10 karat gold.
Ah.
And so
Interesting.
that's where our mind goes when we hear 10 over and over again.
Okay.
So,
Dang,
yeah.
now I feel predictable and basic. Thanks.
yeah. So as always,
Are we all?
if you have any questions that you would like to have us consider, think about, that you think would be fun for us to add into an episode, then you go ahead and email
Yeah.
those to us at story@bfmc.org.
Yeah, let us know what vegetable you thought of.
Yeah.
If it's a carrot.
Welcome to the basic
welcome
club.
to the
That's
club.
right.
Yeah. So in today's episode, we're jumping ahead a couple hundred years and a couple books of the Bible. So the Israelites are now a fully fledged people, and the family that we talked about for the last few weeks has become a lot bigger. What we talked about last week is at the end of Genesis. The Israelites now moved to Egypt because of a famine, and they ended up staying there in, what was it? Where did they stay? The land of Goshen. That's what it is. And they're a lot bigger. So they're in Goshen, and they end up staying there. The Egyptians enslaved them, actually, and they were in Egypt for around 400 years. And if you look back at the story of Abraham, God tells Abraham that they would be enslaved for the next while. And that's pretty cool how it was kind of prophesied at Abraham, and then it took place for the next 400 years to his people.
Unfortunate for them, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good thing. So the whole book of Exodus tells us how they left. But for today, what you need to know is that a man named Moses is now leading Israel.
What? Who's Moses?
Exactly. We haven't heard of him yet. So basically, Moses talks to God face to face, which is a first because that's...
Now, was it face to face? Was
That's
it actually face to face?
That's what it says. I don't know if God has a real face, right? Personification
Brings
of
up some
God.
questions.
But
And then we know that at one point God allowed his presence to pass by, but he hid him. He hid Moses so that he wouldn't see his face.
It's a weird,
and that he would just see his back.
Because it does say face to face, but it also talks about how he's hidden from Moses. And at one point, Moses' face glows from the glory of God. So
I haven't dug into the translation, but I wonder if a better translation might be in person
instead of face to face.
Instead of face to face.
So Moses face to face. God is close with Moses, and kind of closer than Abraham is what really is going on. And God gives Moses the laws and the 10 Commandments, and he's the one that has given them to Israel. And it's incredibly detailed. Everything about life is detailed in the law and how the Israelites are supposed to live, what to eat, how to practice their religion, etc. And that's what the books of Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy are filled with. It's called the Mosaic Law. And that's what kind of we were going to be talking about today in the book of Numbers.
So the Israelites leave Egypt after the plagues that God inflicts on them around the year 1440 BC. Again, ancient dates are complicated, and we don't have an exact time frame. Some archaeologists and historians think it happened a little bit later, more like the 1200s, but we, for our purposes today, are going to stick around the 1400s in BC. And this puts it right in the middle of the new kingdom of the Egyptian empire.
Which is Egypt is one of the oldest civilizations in the world, right? They have a crazy, crazy old history. And, there's the old empire, the really old empire, the new empire. And this is when we are the new kingdom is kind of what Egypt is called at this time.
Yeah. Previous episode, we mentioned that Egypt doesn't change.
Yeah.
Its name remains and still remains, and wondered about some of the spiritual significance of that. I have to be honest, I have not been able to shake that thought. I keep coming back to thinking about that. So
maybe we should do some research on that.
On Egypt, yeah.
Yeah, and its continual presence as it is. So
we'll look into it and let y'all know.
Yeah.
Or if you know, email us.
That's right.
It's story@bfmc.org.
That's right. So to go back to the history, so the people are now in the area of Canaan, and it's more or less the same with city-states, with people like the Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Edomites. If you remember the Edomites and where they came from, Esau, and even earlier, the Moabites, who came from Abraham's nephew, Lot. Now, the Israelites didn't quite trust God, and they were scared actually to conquer Canaan, and so they're stuck as a nomadic people wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They actually the journey that they were to go on was a 3 days journey.
Yeah.
It wasn't even it was so short. And 40 years they see wandering, and we see in the book of Exodus that God provides his people with manna from heaven, and manna is literally, the translation for manna is literally, what is it? And so this is a material that falls from heaven that they use for food, they use to bake with, and so similar to bread. And we'll actually be speaking with our youth tonight, and I'll mention the daily bread that God provides, and Jesus tells us to pray for our daily bread, and that actually has its roots in manna and the daily provision that God gave from heaven. And so it's the food that they eat. And what we're talking about today takes place near the end of those 40 years, just before they finally do what they're supposed to do. But we're not going to get there today.
I like that you said it's a 3 days journey from where they were supposed to be. I always hear, they're lost in the desert.
Yeah,
they know where they are. They're just too scared to go in, and they
Yeah.
get banished out for 40 years. So
Stuck. Yeah, I'm gonna try to get a map of Israel's desert wanderings for our show notes, and you can look at it and you'll just see they literally go back and forth. It's really sad, but yeah, I guess they got lots of steps in.
if they wore their Fitbits,
If they wore their Fitbits or
40
Apple
years worth of
Watches.
steps.
Oh my gosh, that'd be good. They walked from Egypt to Canaan, and then they were scared to conquer Canaan. So God said that they would live in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, the events of today's story is a little bit different than just wandering through Canaan, and it actually takes place in to the east of the Dead Sea in modern-day Jordan, which is in the plains of Moab area. And they lived in the wilderness, and the only really stable thing that they had in the wilderness that could determine their location was the tabernacle. And so that held the Ark of the Covenant, and it was in the middle of the camp, and all the tribes were around it. So it's kind of important for how like judicial and political systems were working there, and
they were all surrounded. Sorry, they all surrounded the tabernacle, which was this tent of meeting where God literally lived.
And so that's why it was all focused on God, and so that's important for what we'll be talking about today.
So our story begins with a census. The promised land is being divided, and every family is getting a portion in their little corner of it. And if you read Numbers chapter 26, you actually see a list of men over 20 and from all the families and tribes, and that's who gets what land and where. And it's actually laid out exactly how it happened. And in that census, you read about a man named Zelophehad from the tribe of Manasseh, and it said he had no sons. So according to the current law, when he dies, his property would go to his closest kin. So that's his brother, his nephew, his father, his uncle, somebody like that. Now we get to chapter 27, and we see that Zelophehad actually had 5 daughters, but they weren't listed in the census. So chapter 27 comes, and we see that Zelophehad had 5 daughters. They were Malha, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tisra. And Zelophehad ends up dying, and the daughters step up, and they go to the tabernacle, which is the place of holiness and authority in their land, and they go see Moses and Eleazar the priest and all the other leaders, and they tell them that their father had died, and they talk about how he wasn't part of this previous rebellion that had gone on, but that he died of his own sin. And they say, "Don't let our father's name die out just because he had no sons. Give us a portion of his inheritance." So Moses decides to go ask God, and God answers him, and he actually sets a new law in place that if a man dies and he has no sons, the daughters have the first claim to the inheritance. And then we see once the promised land is actually taken, that the daughters did receive their father's inheritance, and they marry men from their own tribe, just to ensure that the land stays in their family. And when it's divided, they get the right portion of the land.
Yeah.
It's pretty bold of them.
Yeah, they stood up. That's what I find really cool about the story, is that they said, this is right. We deserve a portion of the land, and they went and asked for it, and God gave it to them.
Yeah, I love it. And what I find interesting is that when I think it carries into our lives, in that when we recognize injustice, we have the opportunity to go to God and to bring that injustice before him. It was unjust that they would not receive an inheritance, and they recognized that, and they went to Moses, who was the one who, and then he brings it to God. And God allows us and welcomes our question. And when something doesn't seem right in the world, he wants us to bring that to him and to go to him and say, God, this seems so unjust. Now, we now have a situation where God speaks directly to us in ways that the response may actually be, you're right, it is not right. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to step into this situation, and how are you going to be the voice for justice? But I just love that they saw that there was an injustice. They brought it to Moses, and Moses said, instead of Moses just saying, that's the law, get over it, he says, exactly. I'm going to go to God with this too. And then they see justice being brought about.
Yeah, that kind of makes me ask a question, is why wasn't it in the law in the first place?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking. It's like, if that is actually right, why wasn't it in the law?
Right.
Patriarchal society,
yeah. And
but,
only the men were numbered in the
God. Yeah, exactly. Only the men were numbered, and God made the law. So that's why I'm like, okay, maybe, why wasn't it in there in the first place? And the answer that I kind of thought of was to show that it was, if there was an injustice, that these women actually stood up, and he kind of gave them a story to tell that it was right for them to do so, to stand up for that injustice.
To give them an opportunity to step into that. Yeah, totally. One of the things that I think is really neat about the census, and this can tie in as it will, is that each of the men who were numbered were to also bring a half shekel to be collected. And so the census, it was actually a preparing for entering into the land, that they would have money, that they would have means, as they were going to be facing a difficult situation. They were told to, go into the land, and then also to drive out all the inhabitants of the land. And
I don't think they're going to leave peacefully.
They weren't going to leave peacefully. There would be a chance for great loss in the midst of that as well. And so this was a practice of tithing before they went into the land, where they were setting aside funds to fund the nation as they went into it as well. So I think it's kind of a neat point about the census.
Cool. Yeah. Another thing that I see a lot when I'm reading kind of the law and how it's set up is that Israel's really counterculture to the rest of the kind of ancient civilizations, especially Canaan. We see that, even specifically to the types of altars they're allowed to use, they're not allowed to eat pork, they're not allowed to do certain sacrifices, the sexuality of the Jewish culture. And then even we see now that the treatment of women is even different than what is all around them.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool. So they're kind of on the outskirts of what is normal.
And that really is a key point of a lot of Moses's writing, because the people are, we talked about this when we talked about the writing of Genesis, the people are asking, who is God? Like, who is this God that you talk to, and you're telling us the things that he says? And one of the things that Moses is establishing is God is different than the other gods. Mm-hmm. The other nations worship these gods, these deities, and they behave in this way and in this manner. And God is establishing through Moses that he is different. He is not those gods, and these are the ways that he's different. And so this is one of the ways that he's actually setting himself apart as different, which is to say, I don't show favoritism just to men. Women are welcome in my kingdom and in my economy, and they have a place which is much different than the surrounding societies, for sure. It's all patriarchy, and it was even dangerous to be a woman.
Mm-hmm. All right, Abby, do you have something to ask us?
Yes. So this leads to the question.
No.
How does this story...
I'm just joking. I like answering this question. Sorry, keep going, Abby.
Did you prepare for it this week, Fletch?
For the most part.
Oh, good. Okay, here we go. No pressure. I'm going to grade you on it.
Let's see.
What I don't understand is how we get to this point in the episode and not be prepared for because oftentimes we get here and I'm like, okay, what do we?
He's
Okay, let's think about it.
I'm sorry.
I'm calling me out.
I'll do better.
I'm calling me out too.
All right. I asked the question so I don't have to answer it. So let's be real here. Okay. So how does this story contribute to fulfilling the story of God?
I don't know, Abby. Why don't you tell us?
Oh, you're so funny.
No. I'll go with what I've got prepared, and then if we get anything out of more than that, fantastic. So I kind of have the first half as being that it kind of, again, like what Jay was saying, is it shows who God is, and it really differentiates him from all the other, pagan gods that are in the area, and that shows us who God truly is, and that really develops his character more. And then actually this story is something that we'll talk about later on in the season, but because daughters now can have an inheritance, that's going to affect how the genealogies are counted throughout the Bible. Mm-hmm. And we'll see now in the New Testament that the reason Jesus can be legally the king of Israel is because his mother had no brothers. And
right.
We'll see that later in an episode, and we'll talk more about it. But it really changes how genealogies are measured throughout Israel, and it's an important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that setting apart of God saying, this is who I am. It's different than the others around me. And we know that Jesus does that as well. We're in the youth right now, we're studying the Sermon on the Mount, and often he says, you have heard it said, but I tell you. And this is one of the ways that we see, you have heard it said, but this is actually the heart of what is written in the law. And so, yeah, this sets up that precedent throughout Scripture for Jesus to come and then fulfill.
Mm-hmm. Anything else, Abby?
Those were excellent.
Oh, thank you so much.
Excellent.
We prepared for them.
Oh, I can tell.
No.
Okay, you get an A+.
Great.
Gold star for both of you.
Great.
Awesome.
All right, well, thanks for joining us
Thank you so
week.
much for listening. Hope you come back next week.
All right, see you then.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.